Thanks for joining me again. My name's Tim Collier, pastor of the Gleaning, and I decided to take a little walk with Jesus, along with him, the last week of his life, this Easter week, this Holy Week. And there's been times when I've left jobs, and I know we all have, that we wanted to impart the information we had to the people around us before we left. And that's what I see Jesus doing. That whole Holy Week. But I got a question for you. Have you ever felt left out? You ever felt excluded? Maybe like you weren't good enough. Same thing happened to the Gentiles in the time of Jesus. You see, they were only allowed to go into the court of the Gentiles at the temple. And there was a warning outside the inner temple that read, "No foreigner may enter the sanctuary and the enclosure. Whoever is caught, on himself shall he put the blame for the death of him which will ensue." If you enter, your death's on your hands. It's not real hospitable, is it? Now, when you take into consideration, it is this area, the outer courts of the temple, the only place the Gentiles were welcomed. And then in Mark 11, we see that it pretty much turned into a Walmart. This is what Jesus walked up on in Mark 11, 15 to 18, where it says, on reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you've made it a den of robbers." So, what does that mean? Jesus flipping tables. Now, stick with me for a second while I tell you some stuff that I've heard before, and I think that it has no bearing whatsoever. People saying Jesus flipped tables over to show you that he's not putting up with your junk. You don't repent, that's what you're going to get. No. Jesus had righteous anger over you trying to make money. That's why he turned over the tables. Wrong again. You can't sell merchandise and coffee in your church. How dare you? How concerned do we really think that Jesus is over somebody getting a large mocha before they go into worship? I don't think so. Or what about Jesus turned over the tables that he's to prove that he's not a pushover. So I'm going to do the same with you. I'm going to whoop your butt. It kind of turns my stomach a little bit, doesn't it? Doesn't it? You hearing it? But I've heard all of that in regards to Jesus getting angry, making a whip, flipping tables, and driving people out of the temple courts. Now, for the person who doesn't understand the new covenant, pushes the law, and expresses no self-control, table flipping Jesus, that's their go-to passage when they want an excuse to act like a jerk. They'd pull this section out of the Bible up and out of context. What would Jesus do? He'd knock you on the head, that's what. No, friend, he wouldn't. On this side of the cross, before he paid that price, he's wooing unbelievers, not trying to cause them pain. And he never did try to cause them pain. Jesus doesn't bring tragedy onto a person and then swoop around them with the backside of that tragedy just to comfort them. What kind of a monster would he be if he did that? This world brings enough trouble on its own. He came to save us from it, not heap on more heartache. So what is the proper context behind the actions of Jesus that day? Did he go berserk because they were gambling, price gouging, or conducting business on holy ground? Here's the truth for you. He was standing up for you and me, dear Gentile. This one section of the temple, as I told you, was designated for non-Jews, not allowed to go anywhere else except this small area to pray. The Gentiles who came to this area were believing in Yahweh, the God of the Jews, but they knew they weren't included in their covenant. But yet they still had faith. They didn't follow Moses out of Egypt. They didn't walk through the muck of the bottom of the sea, nor did they promise God They would do everything written in the book of the laws, it says in Exodus. Yet they still believed in God. They had faith. Faith is what always justified a person, not the law. But that subject, that's for another day. Now, Jesus knew that this one small part of the temple, it gave him hope. Jesus knew that many Gentiles who were saved by faith went there to pray. It was a place of prayer for them, a geographic location of comfort, of longing for something better than being rejected because of their race. The promise God made to Abraham before Israel was even formed. This area of the temple was specifically designed for that promise. Jesus saw what the Jews had done by desecrating this zone of the promise for the Gentiles to be saved. They cared nothing about the Abrahamic promise, and he was hot. The promise God made to Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, not one, but many nations through Abraham's seed, Jesus, not just the nation of Israel. That was being snuffed out by these money-hungry bigots, as it talks about in Galatians 3:29. Now just look at what Jesus said to these fools who were cashing in on the law of Moses by setting up shop in the Gentile section of the temple. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." Christ was quoting two of their own prophets from their own scriptures, Jeremiah and Isaiah. I could picture him yelling at them, "All nations." I said all nations, not just yours. Oh, he was mad, very mad. His own people, their own sacred writings, which foretold about God, including the Gentiles too, they were stomping their feet on that. They would rather make money off the need for animals than realize Jesus would remove that need forever in himself in just a few days, which would bring in everybody. So today, my friends, know this. Jesus got angry and flipped tables because he was passionate about including all nations in with his family, not just the Jews who believed. Not one time in the Bible does Jesus get mad at a Gentile who reached out to him. He only got mad at the legalist who refused to include us. They wanted religion, but Jesus, he wants relationship. Christ got livid when this promise was ignored, and he's still passionate about this very promise today. Through you and I, he's still reaching out to everyone who has not yet believed. Keep being yourself. You're fulfilling the original promise of God to include the entire world in his family by grace through faith. I hope you're able to join me this week throughout as we take a look at Jesus' final instructions. Have a blessed day.